According to the commentaries, Lichtenberg is supposed to have expressed, on several occasions, the regret that he hadn't been born in a world endowed with all the virtues of a book, but with none of its faults. The smell of glue, for example, the small margins, the pedantic tone in each sentence, or the unbearable exclamation marks. Which is to say, the best of all possible worlds, where the beginning and the end are separated by hours or even days of prose, where understanding is a kind of waiting, and haste gets you nowhere. Neither me nor my exercises are entirely vain. We are only slightly vain. We are slightly vain because there is nothing finished on this earth, and man and his works are finite creatures. My exercises and style are slightly vain. They're empty like Rabelais's fried puffy doughnuts, which is to say, farfelu, in the original sense of the word. Hey everybody, thank you as always for watching Leaf by Leaf. Today I get the pleasure of talking about Pierre Senges and his 3 works that are out from Sublunary and translated by Jacob Seifring. We've got Falstaff, Apotheosis, Studies of Silhouettes, and most recently Rabelais's Doughnuts, a selection of short writing. Again, all 3 are out by Sublunary in beautiful translations from Jacob Seifring. I'm also going to be talking about what I still hold as Senges' masterpiece, Fragments of Lichtenberg. This is not from Sublunary, this is from Dalkey Archive. It's not translated by Jacob Seifring, but rather Gregory Flanders. I've talked about Fragments of Lichtenberg a couple of times in some videos, most notably my video on the waste books of Georg Christoph Lichtenberg. I talked in very high-level details and broad strokes about this masterpiece from Sanch. And it should be noted that the most recent English translation of Sanch is his Ahab sequels, which is a follow-up to Moby Dick, of course. This one is co-translated by Jacob Seifring and Tegan Raleigh, out from Contramundum Press. I struggle with the temptation to go ahead and read this one for this video, but I have been challenging myself and pressing myself to hold this off as a sort of dessert to follow my reading of Moby Dick for this channel. As most of you know at this point, Moby Dick is my favorite American novel. I've read it handfuls of times. It's part of my Western canon that I'm trying to do chronologically. So once I get to Moby Dick, I will then treat myself to Ahab sequels from Pierre Senges. Falstaff Apotheosis is a very short 17-page monograph on the famous battle scene in Henry IV Part 1 where Falstaff plays dead. The whole work is indicative of what Sanch does best. And what that is summed up beautifully in 2 words from the translator Jacob Seifring, and that is imaginative commentary. Almost every single one of the books that Sanch has written is some form of glorified footnote or marginalia or commentary. He loves the gloss, he loves the monograph, and you can tell right off the bat with any of the works that you start with that he has a restless, roving, overeducated, hyper-educated mind that has gobbled up all of the humanities and needs different forms in order to establish points of departure for the different works he wants to do. For Sanch, Falstaff is a harbinger for the resurrection of glorious bodies, or for an imaginative commentary. Falstaff dropped into this world like a fly into beer, conscious of that, but learning to love it all the same. So Sanch adapts the scholarly or academic monograph in such a playful and imaginative way. All the hallmarks of a great essay or commentary are here, but they're energized with the fun that you can tell Sanch is having. And he sums up, acting as a dead man in between 2 merciless duel scenes also provides an occasion for John Falstaff to restore the oft maligned nap to its former glory. So you can see there's this playfulness. He's elevating the concept of the nap in literature. As such, the nap won't be the overeater's ignoble cowardice. It will be rife with meaning. It will be heroic. Nap will become stratagem, victory deferred, mockery and diversion, nonviolent wisdom, watercolorists, restraint, dandyish nonchalance, composure of the Stoic age, unmoving harmony with the surrounding landscape, composition and performance combined, silent role bursting through the screen, Eleusinian mystery and Orphic ritual, death's approach, emotionless dance macabre, a trick played on death itself by adopting all its outward attributes in a parodic mode, but with the highest solemnity, and the mind-boggling marriage of clowncraft and the macabre. So right off the bat, in this mere 17-page work of imaginative commentary, we have Sanch, the hyper-educated intellectual, the creative thinker, the energetic specialist, and simply a great writer and a great thinker who is pulling from great literature to construct more great literature. In studies of silhouettes, Sanch cues not off of a Shakespearean play, but off of Kafka's Fragments. He calls them silhouettes here, which is perfect for the concept. He has taken the notebooks and fragments and pieces that were pulled together by Kafka's friend, Max Brod, and cued off of them to just do this imaginative commentary, these imaginative riffs. And so each of the, I think, 92 different silhouettes start off with a bold-faced piece that represents what Kafka wrote, and then the normal type for everything that Sanch does with it. And it extends from the profound to the absurd. From Kafka's fragment, a cry rises up from the river. In the midst of all the riffing, Sanch has it. It is a cry in a voice like a minotaur's, or one of those monsters invented by the Greeks to tide us over until the days of dragons. Where Kafka's fragment has a team of horses escaped from their pen, Sanch finishes it with, it wasn't an allegorical team of allegorical horses violently removed from the symbol of their isolation, but an actual panic of actual creatures set to alarm by shouts or by the first signs of an earthquake. But still, there were enough humans gathered round the pen to analyze the situation and to find meaning there. And if you haven't noticed already, you'll see that Sanch is operating in a parodic mode where he is appropriating the form and style and content of academia, but he's using it correctly to draw out meaning or different ways of looking at things, while at the same time sort of making fun of it. Where Kafka says, two friends were out making their rounds on horseback together one morning, Sanch finishes it with, by the time they realized that their friendship was not a friendship at all, but the mutual surveillance of two jealous men, bitter enemies in fact, morning had become afternoon, then evening, the next day, then the day after, then the new year, till half a century had gone by. As for the horse, well, it was eaten years ago. Bathos thus is used over and over to great comedic effect. This from Sanch also sort of offers a key to his own writing. What a mistake to write without exactness. We ought not to entrust a moment of our lives to such a loose grammar. There must be in this world some force from on high or below to weigh us down or draw us up out of ourselves, compelling us to be precise, even if it gives our speech a cumbersome majesty and slowness. Could also be likened to what many critics have pointed out as the Baroque style of the prose of Pierre Sanche. And this one just came out from Sublunary, translated once again by Jacob Seifring. This is Rabelais' Doughnuts. It's a selection of short writings. This is just a treat. And it was the first time that I really started thinking about the likeness of Umberto Eco, the great Italian medieval scholar and juggernaut of a book collector and writer, whereas Eco is definitely much more the professor, which he was. His was a more approachable and immediately accessible prose in his fiction and also in his essays. Sanche is sort of like a French Eco, but in a slightly more obscured and Baroque, Rococo style. This is his collection of what, in one of the short pieces, he will refer to as slightly vain exercises in style. In a piece called Measure of All Things, where Sanch appropriates the voice of Pier Aretino in a letter to Michelangelo about his Last Judgment on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. We get this passage. But to pass from fresco to a discourse on the fresco, what can that be if not the admission of my powerlessness, namely, love of the gloss, making an absence of talent? I thought that I was accomplishing yet another refinement, treading in slippers down paths toward the abstract. I thought that I was translating swathes of colors and charcoal lines into words designating the swathe and the line. But I'm not fooling anyone. I am a representative of loquacious sloth. And there again, one feels that Pierre Sanch is commenting on what he loves to do and humorously calling it loquacious sloth. If I had to pick one section in all of these short writings to be representative of all of them and to impart the flavor of what Sanch does best, it would have to be this one little section called The Library of Bouvard and P&eacute. In this collection of ruminations on literary libraries, we have Don Quixote's library, we have a library that Thomas de Quincey visited, and here we have the library of Flaubert's incomplete novel and his characterizations of Bouvard and P&eacute. The 1,500 books that Gustave Flaubert read in Coissé, or at the Rouen Library, or the National in Paris, steadfastly devoured to the point of having his brain transformed into soft cheese, are also the books in the Chavignol Library. Bouvard and P&eacute preside over it, just as they preponderate over their vegetable garden, shovels in hand, proud in anticipation of the duty done. For Gustave, the 1,500 books meant many afternoons of misery in poorly heated rooms. For these two gentlemen, 1,500 books assembled in a farmhouse are the promise of knowledge, accession to knowledge, or, better yet, the promise of the layman's conversion into a savant. They contain pedagogical virtue. They are receptacles for truths. Before long, they will be objects of critique and renouncement. Little it matters, though, venerated or tossed into the ditch. Books are the attribute of comfortable people. Yes, people who reflect on when they will nap and be able to show off their shelves of beautiful bindings to their neighbors. To these two gentlemen, the contents of a library are books to be read and possess, authors to boo once deification has ended, booing being the free will of the amateur in the professional's library. A mélange of indispensable classics and stupefyingly dull volumes teeming with pignoufisms. Like the Library of Congress, P&eacute's farm simultaneously contains a Pantagruel, the treatises on hygiene, and the sermons of some priest. And when it will come time to buy up paper by the kilo, the dream of universalism will be fulfilled tenfold. To choose, to weed out the good from the bad, will require a nerve which, thanks to their intimate knowledge of failure, these gentlemen have learned to mistrust. In the end, this will be everything, the admirable, consolatory, formless everything, exhaustivity joined to nothing, if not to the right addition, and the entirety of unmoving things. And so from the writing of Pierre Sanch, we get this exuberance of passion for the reading life, the life spent in libraries, the life spent in and around books, the life spent writing, the life spent thinking about writers, thinking about their work, thinking about literary characters, thinking about literary semiotics and meaning. And so it's no wonder that Georg Christoph Lichtenberg and his waste books that he left behind were the perfect fodder, the perfect grist for Sanch's mill. Fragments of Lichtenberg is a stunning achievement that only Sanch could do. In the end, this is a brilliant love letter to the humanities. It is a roman fleuve about a roman fleuve. For Sanch takes these 8,000 fragments that Lichtenberg, the inventor, the aphorist, the academician, the professor, the all-around Renaissance man, he left them behind, and Sanch imagines these different members of the Lichtenberg Society trying to assemble all of them in the right combination to figure out what it was Lichtenberg really left behind for us. Not content with just leaving them as disparate fragments, we have these different people throughout the ages who will take up the task and offer these conjectures, such as the pieces are one coherent work. They just need to be assembled in the right combination. Thus sparks all these different people who are sitting around with these little strips of paper and glue and reconstructing and combining and trying to offer up the right combination. But then we get a conjecture over here that there's a large chunk of these pieces that is missing. And so it's moot to try and combine them all. In the end, we get separate novels, parodic novels, satiric novels that Lichtenberg was putting together. One is Ovid in Rome, Noah's Ark, Robinson Dandy instead of Robinson Crusoe, and Snow White's 8 Dwarf. They're all based on different combinations of the fragments, and the people who offer the conjecture offer up all this, scholarly evidence to back up their conjecture. And as we've seen already, this is perfect for Sanch because this is an offer for and an inspiration for imaginative commentary at its best. Just as he cued off of the fragments from Kafka in Studies of Silhouettes, here he gets to riff on these fragments from the Waste books. It kicks off with a brilliant appropriation and redesignation of Goethe's famous last words, Merlicht, to be Merlichtenberg, as if he died without getting the in Berg out. And he goes on to do what he does best. He puts the totality of the institution of the study of literature on a hilarious and complicit and ultimately loving display. As he's telling the history of all of these different academics and savants and acolytes trying to offer their best conception of what Lichtenberg had really done with his waste books. We get that history intertwined with another essay that reads like a bunch of intertwined essays. So you've got the one that's on the history of the Lichtenbergians. You've got one that's on Lichtenberg himself and these hilarious philosophical ruminations on his gibbosity, which is to say his hump on his back. There's also this, and as you're reading this, I guarantee you will find yourself thinking over and over again, how could someone be this brilliant? Someone meaning Pierre Sange. And then, supplementary to all of these intertwined essays, we get marginalia in the text that we hold with actual fragments from Lichtenberg that are illuminating and supporting the claims and narrative. We also get hilarious, or often hilarious, academic footnotes all throughout. Not at the bottom of the page, but usually in the margins. In fact, in the margins and normally shoving the main text over as if to say, hey, I'm just as important as you. To give you a little bit of the flavor of Sange in Fragments of Lichtenberg, this is an early piece of the history of the Lichtenbergians, which is an ongoing thread. Let's suppose there's a story, an epic, a saga, or a feuilleton, who knows, of the reconstitution of the oeuvre of Georg Christoph Lichtenberg, undertaken by 4 or 5 generations of scholars and lovers of the written word between 1899 and 1999. It would be filled with enthusiasts, collectors, booksellers, archivists of all kinds, bibliophiles, and even bibliophages, that is, people who eat books. We would see pioneers, losers, casualties, freeloaders, cheaters, scholars, connoisseurs, and laymen, bookworms destined to become graphomaniacs, dandies with Shakespeare rings, the bohemian youth of Dublin, particularly frisky in the late morning hours, or the literary cliques of Paris, chic to the nth degree, wearing wing collars and stovepipe pants. We would see university professors timid to various degrees, myopic in proportion to their timidity, and in these timid myopes, we would catch the glimmers of genius. There would be Kabbalists coming from the distant countryside before disappearing into smoke, which they would mistake for foliage or divine grace. There would be emissaries, canvassers, frequenters of auction houses, lovers of puzzles, 100-year-old or even 200-year-old hommes de lettres, a kind of mute calligrapher who, before dying, becomes fascinated yet again by some bits of manuscript. There would surely be German philologists tired of pushing their way through the halls of their gymnasium only to run smack into the word hubris, tired of digging in Asia Minor to find the ruins of Troy under the ruins of Troy. We'd see the scholars of Paris, yes, yet again, neglecting their objects of study, the better to cultivate controversies, because the function of the querelle à la Française is to distance yourself from your opponent while also trying to tear his hair out, and dramatize everything they touch, marching back to their schools in triumph before the gory fingernails and teeth of the doomed house of Atreus. We'd also cross paths with the relatively sedate intellectuals of Sweden, faithful, though this remains to be verified, to a certain reserve for which they are so well known, without alcohol and without excess, the exact opposite of the tropical passion of Cuba, of Havana in the age of the casinos. There'd be one or two enlightened patrons at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th centuries, during an age when families sitting on a pile of thalers or pounds sterling judged it good for the salvation of their souls and for the future of civilization to reserve a portion of their fortune to be given in installments to composers, painters, or odd dodecaphonists. And so, yes, we've got sprawling sentences, we've got lists, we've got humor, we've got high, rich erudition. But above all, we've got someone who is in love with their subject and possibly more in love with writing about it. In that excerpt, we also get the whole book in miniature. As we get towards the end, I was wondering, how do you wrap up something this brilliant and this novel of a conception of imaginative commentary? But it ends in ekperosis, which is also a recurring symbol taken from ancient Greek conception, a sort of recycling of the world that happens every so often, every very long so often, and we apply that here. If you haven't read Sanch yet, I'm certain that you will find his work a treat. If you have read Sanch, I hope that you found something in this video to take away. As for me, I'm looking forward to reading Moby Dick and then Sanch's imaginative follow-up, Ahab sequels.